So, is everyone excited to learn about otters? Well, you've come to the wrong talk. I'm so sorry. I've baited you all in with this picture. So, this is my dissertation project for my master's, a bit mouthy, but it's titled Investigating the Impact of Housing Development on the Functional Connectivity of Eurasian Otter within the Ouse Burn River area. So, just a quick background about myself. There's me and Kilda. Try not to fall in. Like Holly just said, I graduated from Newcastle with Conservation Ecosystem Management degree back in December. And I think I kind of realised I'm very interested in using QGIS, so like mapping software, to solve conservation issues. It's not something I'd used before, but just over the course of the year, I found I really liked it, and I kind of wanted to do my project on it. So I began, I met with Claire Freeman, and I kind of wanted to do something that was more focused and local. So we kind of had a chat, and this came up that some of you may remember. There was a housing development proposal back in 2021 by Persimmon Homes. You can see the reserve, and then just over Salters Lane there was a proposed development. This was objected to, and eventually they scrapped it. But it's clear that sort of the land around Gosforth is, I guess, kind of hot for developers. So it's good to sort of get a step ahead, and try and think about what development might actually impact. So we had a chat about different types of animals we could look at. I think deer were initially proposed. Eventually, I think I went to a talk here with Anne Rees of the Rees Foundation. She talked about her project, the Ouse Burn Way project, thinking about waterway health and trying to improve the Ouse Burn. So I thought, it would be great to sort of do something that sort of synchronises with that a little bit. So ended up otters, brilliant. Everyone likes otters. That's why you're all here listening to me. This isn't about otters. But I was given this wonderful data set by Vivian Kent of the Otter Network. And these are all data points she gave me from some of the surveys they do. So if there's scat, live sightings, even dead sightings. So this is basically the area I looked at. You've got the Tyne, Ouse Burn, some of the other tributaries, and then basically a 1,000-metre buffer around all of that. Otters are great because they're like super mobile. They move around a lot. They're also a riparian species, so you find them in the waterways and also the associated woodland. And for the kind of modelling and mapping I wanted to do, they're actually a really good target for it, and they've been used before as a target species. The reason it's also important is because otters over the last 70 years have had a really tough time. They began using insecticides many, many years ago. They weren't banned until 30 years later. By this point, recovery was slow to happen. There was long-term effects. Also, a lot of habitat degradation had taken place over that time. So even now, recovery is still quite slow. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, just make sure I catch everyone up so you know all the terms I'm talking about. Functional connectivity. You may know what connectivity means. When you have a woodland and another woodland, you connect them. That's connectivity. Functional connectivity specifically is incorporating processes into that. So it's about how the landscape facilitates that movement. The way I think of it to help me is when, especially with otters, kind of think about their behaviour. They could move over here, but would they? Why would they do that? What sort of drives that movement? And then fragmentation. You've probably heard of this one, but I'll just quickly go over it. When you have a big habitat, big patch, and it's broken up so that you're left with many small patches, or importantly, different land types. So, for example, if you have 40-hectare woodland, and it gets broken up, and you end up with 4 parcels of 10-hectare woodland, it's not the same. It's not as high quality a habitat. the processes, the functionality changes, the species composition changes. So when I started looking into my project, I kind of delved into stuff that had been done before, and these are some of the ones I based my work on. So this is looking at horseshoe bats, I believe in Devon, and this is the kind of map I was trying to produce. So what you're looking at here is the mouse work. You can't, perfect. So this is a current map. So the way to think about that is very similar to an electric current. It takes the path of least resistance. It sort of applies that logic to connectivity. So the areas in red are areas of high current, which essentially means high probability that they'll be used by bats. So it was interesting to see this is the expert opinion flyway. So this is what experts believed where the bats were moving. When you do the modeling, though, it kind of agrees with it, but there's this whole area that's kind of been highlighted that they might be using. So it's useful to get kind of a better sense of where they might be moving. You can also see, it's quite an interesting sort of picture they paint with the little blocks and squares. These are actually hedgerows. You can kind of see that when you look at that. They use the hedgerows, rivers, I think next to woodlands as well. So another one was with otters, actually, but this was done on a much larger scale. So this is, where was it, Western Alps. So again, the high connectivity is yellow, and the low is the purple. So you can kind of get, even at a much greater scale, an idea of where otters might be moving, what paths they're using. So what I wanted to do was first conduct something called a multi-criteria evaluation. This is where you take all the factors that you think are affecting otters and affecting their movement, and you put them all together, and hopefully you get a map that kind of ranks the suitability of an area for their movement. And by doing this, hopefully you can find quote-unquote pinch points, so areas that are really important, like connectivity corridors. That if you preserve these, then you preserve that connectivity. So this is the easiest way to sort of visualize this. You just take a bunch of factors, you mush them all together, and then you hopefully end up with one nice looking map at the end. So these are some of the factors I use, not all of them, but land cover, obviously otters, they like water, so that gets a high score. Woodland, pretty high, then it kind of goes down. Roads were broken up by traffic volume, because I'm sure you've all heard or seen there are often road deaths, so it's obvious that they are trying to cross. It's just what types of roads are they trying to cross. So motorways were excluded. I assume they're not trying to cross motorways. Mask layer is like a building, so obviously they can't move through buildings, so you just give these a 0. They're not even taken into account. And the way I did this was using suitability weightings, so 10, so waterways, best habitat, most permeable, and then going down. This was sent out to Vivian Kent of the Otter Network, also to Chris Wren, who's here today, to sort of help me score and get a feel for the weighting. It's just helpful to kind of standardize it. So this is my first attempt. The yellow, so obviously you can kind of see it follows the river, the waterways, is the high connectivity, and then purple's lower. So what I did was I kept trying this, and I kind of tried to reverse engineer the data points so they kind of match up. And you can see they kind of change as I go through it. This is where I put the mask layer in, so these are the buildings now completely blocked out, so they're not considered. This is just a big blob. It's my favorite one. I think that was a late night one, that one. But eventually I got something that vaguely looked okay. This time I swapped the colors around, so the darker areas are better suitability. So you look at Gosforth. Lower suitability is kind of city centre, urban areas. The reason this area is dark is just because it's further away from the city I considered, so it's not really part of the connectivity modelling. So then what I wanted to do was make one of the maps like you saw with the horseshoe bats, but for otters, and I wanted to try and compare that with how that might have changed since the 1960s. So again, you're going to see some shapeless blobs. This is the start point of the Ouse Burn, and this is Shibden Pond Nature Reserve. And this is my first attempt at getting a nice looking map of how the otters might be moving through the landscape. This was from Gosforth to Shibden. This, I'm getting closer, but you can probably see it was very frustrating. I know for a fact the otters aren't moving through the town centre. You know, we'd know about it. So it was kind of trying to figure out what is the sort of crucial factor that is giving this map, keeping it from being what you would expect it to look like. And eventually, I put in one factor and I ended up with this. So this one, from Shibden all the way up to Gosforth, the factor was slope. Otters are good climbers, they're not great climbers. It was mentioned very briefly in a paper I read, and I thought, oh, I'll try that. So I excluded all areas above, I think it was a 45-degree angle, and it just condensed everything down. And you can kind of see it follows the river from Shibden, and you get these little areas where there's high connectivity, so there's a better visualization of it. But basically what this means is for an otter to go from Gosforth to Shibden, they have to pass through these areas in red. So if you were to, say, develop on one of these areas, you're effectively isolating a population, say in Gosforth, from a population in the Tyne. So it's kind of about strategic conservation. Then I wanted to do some actual simulations of housing development and see how that might affect connectivity around the reserve. So I painstakingly hand digitized almost all of Newcastle. It took many days and many hours, and I never want to do it again. But you can see the difference between the 60s and now. Urbanisation has happened a lot. It's increased significantly. And you can see Gosforth is starting to close in around Gosforth. In the end, I didn't even use all of the map that I digitized. I only used this little bit. So if anyone wants to buy a map off me of a very unusual shape of Newcastle, then please let me know. But basically, just to get numbers, around the reserve, so this is a kilometre around the reserve, urbanisation has happened, it's increased by 112%, woodland's gone up very slightly, but grassland's gone down, so that's likely because of agriculture being converted to housing, and also housing development, sometimes they have trees that end up in the total. So this is the same connectivity mapping I did, and this is just around Gosforth, and you may notice that since the 60s to now, actually not a lot has changed. So this is to get from the middle of Gosforth down to the Ouse Burn River junction, and then that will give them access to the rest of the Ouse Burn and the Tyne. So it was interesting to see that this actual path, this corridor, has been relatively unaffected over the last 60 years, unlike all the area around the reserve. So then I want to take it a step further and think about if development was going to happen on that area, what is the most impactful and the least impactful kind of development that would happen. So I broke up that area into a couple of different patches. The subsidence pond I just left out because they're just not going to be able to develop on that. It's worth noting also, number 3 is a almost continuous woodland patch running alongside the river. So it's quite important when it came to developing. So, for example, this is the first simulation I ran. which was just on the west side. And let's see here. So urbanisation, this is only an increase of 15%. Generally, the corridor is left intact. It's important that they still have access to that woodland area, and they can kind of make their way over to the junction. Number of corridor patches, think of this as fragmentation of the corridor itself. So the corridor has jumped from 43 patches suddenly to 157. So it's being broken up. Second one, I just did the east side. This only increased by 12, nearly 13%. And same again, the number of patches actually went down from the first simulation. The third one, this is when I combined those two, so nearly 30% increase. The patch size has jumped pretty dramatically. You can already see that the continuous corridor is almost broken up, if not, doesn't quite make it at the end there. And then the last one, worst case scenario, they're building all of it. The corridor's gone at that point. They're not going to be able to make it through that. So, if I had to make a recommendation, not ideal, but if they were going to build, you would hope it would be the second one, where there's still a decent amount of space here for them to move, and the corridor itself is largely intact. So, you might be asking, why is this important? So like I mentioned before, it's very important that these corridors are recognised and can be strategically conserved. Obviously, money is the name of the game. If you know the exact areas you can throw money at and keep it open, then great. You're probably going to save money in the long run then. Changes to greenbelt policy means that a lot of these corridors might be on brownfield. This could be for any species. Brownfield, grey belt, that kind of thing. If they do end up getting developed on, we need to think about how it might affect the corridors. The fact that right now UK policy doesn't actually consider the corridors. It did very briefly for environmental impact assessments in the testing stage, but was later removed, which to me says they do know it's important, but for whatever reason they've taken it out. However, they may have taken it out because this is not perfect science. It's very subjective. Like I said with the weightings, if I ask someone else to do it, they might weight things differently. Everyone's got a different opinion, so it's very hard to standardize. And also the fact this took me a long time, and I ended up with nearly 60 gigabytes of data of just maps. So it's data heavy, it's very time consuming. And then a shameless plug for my LinkedIn. Thank you. That's all.